The sun rose over the small town of Eagle's Rest, casting a golden glow over the bustling farmers' market. Vendors arranged their stalls with care, and locals chatted over fresh produce. Among them was John Carter, a disabled veteran with a limp and a cane, quietly setting up his stall. To everyone in town, John was just the friendly, unassuming farmer who sold the best tomatoes around. But what no one knew was that beneath his worn flannel shirt and faded jeans was a man with a past far more dangerous than anyone could imagine. John had spent years hiding his true identity. After retiring from the military as a Green Beret, he'd chosen a quiet life, trading combat boots for work boots. His limp was a reminder of his service, but it didn't slow him down. As he arranged his produce, his sharp eyes scanned the market, noting every detail: vendors, customers, and the distant rumble of motorcycles growing louder. The peace of the morning was shattered when 5 bikers from the notorious Storm Riders gang rolled into the market. Led by their arrogant leader, Lance "Python" Kingston, the bikers were looking for trouble. They swaggered through the stalls, knocking over displays and intimidating vendors. When they reached John's stall, Python sneered, "Well, well, looks like the crippled farmer's got himself a little vegetable stand." John kept his head down, his hands steady as he arranged his tomatoes. He knew better than to engage, but the bikers weren't done. Python leaned in, his breath reeking of whiskey, and said, "You're on our turf now, old man. Time to pay up." The market fell silent as everyone watched, too afraid to intervene. But John wasn't afraid. He'd faced far worse than a bunch of thugs on motorcycles. As Python reached for a tomato, John's calm voice cut through the tension. "Those are $3 each. You break it, you buy it." The bikers laughed, but something in John's tone made Python hesitate. For a split second, the gang leader felt a flicker of doubt. Who was this disabled farmer? And why wasn't he scared? Little did the Storm Riders know they weren't dealing with just a farmer. They were about to learn the hard way that underestimating a retired Green Beret was the biggest mistake they could make. The bikers' laughter echoed through the market, but John Carter remained calm. He adjusted his stance slightly, his cane resting against the stall. To anyone watching, he looked like a man trying to avoid trouble. But beneath the surface, his military training kicked in. His eyes tracked every movement: Python's aggressive posture, the other bikers spreading out, and the civilians nervously backing away. Python crushed a tomato in his hand, the red pulp dripping onto John's carefully arranged display. "You think you're tough, old man?" he sneered. "This is our town now. You either pay up or we shut you down." John's voice was steady, almost too calm. "This market's been here for decades. It doesn't belong to you." Python's face twisted with anger. He stepped closer, his gang closing in behind him. "You've got a big mouth for a cripple," he spat. "Maybe we need to teach you some respect." The tension was thick as Python raised his hand, ready to strike. But before he could move, John's cane shot out, catching Python in the ribs with a sharp crack. The gang leader stumbled back, clutching his side. The other bikers froze, stunned by the sudden move. John stood tall, his cane now held like a weapon. "You boys might want to think twice about your next move," he said, his voice low but firm. "I've dealt with worse than you." Python recovered quickly, his face red with rage. "You're dead, old man!" he shouted, signaling his gang to attack. But John was ready. He moved with precision, using his cane to block strikes and deliver quick, calculated blows. One biker lunged at him, only to be met with a swift strike to the knee that sent him crashing to the ground. Another tried to grab him from behind, but John twisted out of his grip using the man's momentum to throw him into a stack of crates. The market erupted into chaos as vendors and customers scrambled to safety. Python, realizing his gang was outmatched, pulled a knife from his belt. "You're gonna regret this," he growled, lunging at John. John sidestepped the attack, his movements fluid despite his limp. With a quick flick of his cane, he disarmed Python, sending the knife clattering to the ground. Before the gang leader could react, John delivered a final blow, knocking him to the pavement. The remaining bikers hesitated, their confidence shattered. John stood over Python, his cane resting lightly in his hand. "Get out of here," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "And don't come back." The bikers didn't need to be told twice. They helped Python to his feet and retreated to their bikes, their bravado replaced by fear. As they roared away, the market fell silent once more. John picked up his cane and began cleaning up the mess, his movements slow and deliberate. To the onlookers, he was just a farmer again, a disabled veteran who'd stood up to a gang. But as he glanced toward the horizon, his eyes hardened. He knew this wasn't over. The storm riders would be back, and when they returned, they'd bring more than just knives and threats. Little did they know, John Carter wasn't just a farmer or a disabled veteran. He was a retired Green Beret, and he'd spent years preparing for a fight far bigger than a bunch of bikers. The news of the biker confrontation spread through Eagle's Rest like wildfire. By midday, everyone in town was talking about the disabled farmer who'd taken on the storm riders and sent them running. Some called him a hero, while others whispered that he'd just made things worse. But John Carter didn't pay much attention to the chatter. He had more important things to worry about. As he drove his old pickup truck back to his farm, John's mind was already working through the next steps. He knew the storm riders wouldn't let this slide. They'd come back, and when they did, they'd bring reinforcements. But John wasn't afraid. He'd spent years preparing for moments like this. Back at his farm, John moved with purpose. He unlocked a hidden compartment in his barn, revealing a stash of equipment that would make most people's jaws drop. Night vision goggles, encrypted radios, and a collection of weapons, all carefully hidden behind the facade of a simple farmer's life. John wasn't just a retired Green Beret. He was a man with a mission. As he checked his gear, John's phone buzzed. It was a secure message from an old friend, David Martinez, who now worked with the FBI. The message was brief. "Storm riders mobilizing. Expect retaliation. Stay sharp." John deleted the message and slipped the phone back into his pocket. He didn't need a warning to know what was coming. The storm riders were a small part of a much larger problem. A weapons trafficking operation that stretched across state lines. John had been quietly gathering intel on them for months, waiting for the right moment to strike. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, John sat on his porch, his cane resting beside him. He watched the shadows lengthen across his fields, his mind replaying the day's events. The bikers had underestimated him, just like so many others had over the years. But John knew better than to underestimate them in return. He heard the distant rumble of motorcycles before he saw them. The storm riders were back, and this time they weren't alone. A convoy of trucks and bikes rolled down the dirt road toward his farm, their headlights cutting through the darkness. John stood slowly, his cane in one hand and a radio in the other. "Martinez," he said into the radio, his voice calm. "They're here. Time to move." The response crackled through the speaker. "Copy that. Backup is en route. Don't do anything stupid, John." John smirked. Stupid is their specialty, not mine. As the bikers surrounded his property, John stepped into the shadows, his movements silent, despite his limp. He'd spent years turning his farm into a fortress, and now it was time to put that preparation to the test. The storm riders thought they were coming to teach a lesson to a disabled farmer. But as they stepped onto his land, they were walking into a trap, one set by a man who'd spent his entire life outsmarting his enemies. The storm riders rolled onto John's property, with their engines roaring, their headlights illuminating the farmhouse and barn. They were confident, armed with bats, knives, and a few handguns. Python, still nursing his bruised ribs, led the charge, his face twisted with anger. "Find the old man!" he shouted. "We're not leaving until he's begging for mercy!" But John Carter was nowhere to be seen. The farm was eerily quiet, the only sound the crunch of gravel under the bikers' boots as they spread out. They kicked open the barn door, only to find it empty, except for a few bales of hay and some farming tools. "Where is he?" one of the bikers muttered, his voice tinged with unease. Python scowled. "He's here somewhere. Tear this place apart." What the bikers didn't know was that John was watching them from the shadows. Hidden in a camouflaged observation post, he monitored their movements through a pair of night vision goggles. His farm wasn't just a home. It was a carefully designed battlefield, and he knew every inch of it. As the bikers searched the property, John activated a series of traps. The first biker to step into the barn tripped a hidden wire, sending a cascade of hay bales tumbling down and pinning him to the ground. Another biker, trying to sneak around the back of the farmhouse, triggered a motion sensor that released a burst of blinding smoke. "What the hell is going on?" Python shouted, his voice rising in panic. John moved silently through the chaos, his cane now replaced by a compact tactical baton. He emerged from the shadows behind a biker who was frantically waving away the smoke. With a quick, precise strike, John disabled the man, leaving him unconscious on the ground. The bikers were starting to realize they were out of their depth. "This isn't right," one of them yelled. "He's just a farmer." But John was far from just a farmer. He'd spent years training for scenarios like this, and his farm was rigged with enough surprises to keep the bikers off balance. As they regrouped near the barn, John triggered another trap, a series of flashbang grenades hidden in the trees. The explosions lit up the night, disorienting the bikers and sending them scrambling for cover. Python, desperate to regain control, pulled out a handgun and fired blindly into the darkness. "Show yourself, you coward!" he screamed. John's voice came from the shadows, calm and steady. "You should have stayed away, Python. This isn't your fight." The gang leader spun around, trying to locate the source of the voice, but John was already on the move. He emerged from the darkness behind Python, disarming him with a swift strike and sending the gun skidding across the ground. Before Python could react, John delivered a final blow, knocking him to his knees. The remaining bikers, seeing their leader defeated, turned and ran, their bravado shattered. John watched them go, his breathing steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He knew this wasn't over. The storm riders were just the tip of the iceberg. But for now, he'd sent a clear message. His farm was off limits. As the sound of retreating motorcycles faded into the night, John activated his radio. "Martinez," he said, "the farm is secure. But this is just the beginning." The response came through immediately. "Copy that, John. Backup is 5 minutes out. You sure you're okay?" John glanced at the unconscious bikers scattered across his property. "I'm fine, but tell your team to hurry. We've got a lot of work to do." As he waited for the FBI to arrive, John leaned on his cane and looked out over his farm. The quiet life he'd built here was gone, replaced by the chaos of a mission he couldn't ignore. The storm riders had come looking for a fight, but they'd found something far more dangerous. A retired Green Beret who wasn't afraid to defend what was his. As the FBI arrived at John's farm, the scene was chaotic. Bikers lay unconscious or groaning in pain, their bikes and trucks scattered across the property. Agents quickly secured the area, cuffing the storm riders and loading them into waiting vehicles. David Martinez, John's old friend and FBI handler, approached him with a mix of relief and frustration. "You couldn't wait for backup, could you?" Martinez said, shaking his head. John shrugged, leaning on his cane. "They came to my farm. I wasn't going to let them trash the place." Martinez sighed. "You're lucky you're still in one piece. These guys aren't just small-time thugs, John. They're part of something bigger." John nodded. He'd suspected as much for months. The storm riders weren't just a local gang causing trouble. They were a piece of a much larger puzzle. As Martinez briefed him on the latest intel, the pieces started to come together. The storm riders were involved in a weapons trafficking operation, smuggling high-powered firearms and military-grade equipment across state lines. Their leader, Python, was just a pawn in a much larger game. The real power behind the operation was a shadowy figure known only as the Broker, a former military contractor who'd gone rogue. The Broker's been using gangs like the Storm Riders to move weapons, Martinez explained. He's got connections everywhere. Military, government, even private security firms. Taking him down won't be easy. John listened carefully, his mind already working through the implications. He'd spent years preparing for this moment, gathering intel and building a network of contacts. But now, with the Storm Riders neutralized and Python in custody, the mission was about to escalate. "What's the plan?" John asked. Martinez handed him a file. "We need to hit the Broker where it hurts. His supply chain. Python's already talking, trying to cut a deal. He's given us the location of their next shipment. If we can intercept it, we might be able to trace it back to the Broker." John flipped through the file, his eyes narrowing as he studied the details. The shipment was scheduled to arrive in 2 days at an abandoned warehouse just outside town. It was a high-risk operation, but John knew it was their best shot at taking down the Broker's network. "I'm in," John said, closing the file, "but we need to move fast. If the Broker suspects we're onto him, he'll disappear." Martinez nodded. "We've got a team ready to go, but we need someone on the inside, someone who knows how these guys operate." John didn't hesitate. "I'll do it. I've spent years blending in as a farmer. I can get close without raising suspicion." Martinez looked at him, concern etched on his face. "You sure about this, John? You're not exactly in peak condition." John smirked, tapping his cane lightly on the ground. "I've got everything I need right here. Besides, they'll never see me coming." As the FBI team finished securing the scene, John returned to his farmhouse to prepare. He unlocked a hidden compartment in his bedroom, revealing a collection of tactical gear, body armor, communications equipment, and a compact assault rifle. He'd hoped he'd never have to use it again, but the stakes were too high to back down now. As he suited up, John's mind drifted back to his days as a Green Beret. He'd faced impossible odds before, and he'd always come out on top. But this time was different. This wasn't just about taking down a criminal. It was about protecting the life he'd built in Eagle's Rest. The next 48 hours would be critical. The Storm Riders were just the beginning. The real fight was about to begin. 2 days later, John Carter stood in the shadows of an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The air was thick with tension as he watched a convoy of trucks roll in, their headlights cutting through the darkness. This was it, the Broker's weapons shipment. John adjusted his earpiece, his voice barely a whisper. "Martinez, the package has arrived. Moving in." Martinez's voice crackled through the radio. "Copy that, John. We're in position. Remember, we need evidence linking this shipment to the Broker. Don't engage unless necessary." John didn't respond. He knew the risks, but he also knew this was their best chance to take down the broker's operation. With his cane in one hand and a compact pistol in the other, he moved silently through the shadows, his movements precise despite his limp. Inside the warehouse, the storm riders were unloading crates of weapons under the watchful eye of a man in a tailored suit. The broker. John recognized him immediately from the intel Martinez had provided. The broker was calm and composed, barking orders to the bikers as they worked. John slipped inside, using the chaos of the unloading process to stay hidden. He planted small surveillance devices on the crates, ensuring the FBI would have solid evidence of the broker's involvement. But as he moved closer to the broker, one of the bikers spotted him. "Hey, who the hell are you?" the biker shouted, raising his gun. John didn't hesitate. He fired a single shot, taking the biker down before he could alert the others. But the sound of the gunshot echoed through the warehouse, drawing everyone's attention. "We've got an intruder!" the broker shouted, his calm demeanor cracking for the first time. "Find him!" The warehouse erupted into chaos as the bikers scrambled to locate John. He moved quickly, using the crates and machinery for cover. His cane became a weapon, delivering precise strikes to anyone who got too close. But the bikers were relentless, and John knew he couldn't hold them off forever. "Martinez, I'm compromised," John said into his radio. "I need backup, now." "Hang tight, John. We're moving in." As the bikers closed in, John made a split-second decision. He grabbed a flashbang grenade from his belt and hurled it into the center of the warehouse. The explosion blinded and disoriented the bikers, giving John the opening he needed. He sprinted toward the broker, who was trying to escape through a side door. "Going somewhere," John said, blocking the broker's path. The broker sneered, pulling a pistol from his jacket. "You're just one man. You really think you can stop me?" John didn't answer. He lunged forward, using his cane to knock the gun from the broker's hand. The two men grappled, but John's training gave him the upper hand. With a swift strike, he disarmed the broker and pinned him to the ground. "It's over," John said, his voice cold and steady. Before the broker could respond, the warehouse doors burst open, and FBI agents flooded in. Martinez led the charge, his team quickly securing the bikers and the weapons. "Nice work, John," Martinez said, cuffing the broker. "We've got everything we need to take down his entire network." John nodded, leaning on his cane as he caught his breath. The fight was over, but the mission wasn't. The broker's arrest was just the beginning. There were still connections to uncover, corrupt officials to expose, and a network of criminals to dismantle. As the FBI loaded the broker into a waiting vehicle, John looked out over the warehouse. The quiet life he'd built in Eagle's Rest was gone, replaced by the chaos of a mission that wasn't finished. But he knew he'd done the right thing. Martinez approached him, handing him a bottle of water. "You okay?" John took a long drink, then nodded. "I'll live. What's next?" Martinez smiled. "Next, we take down the rest of the network. But first, you deserve some rest. You've earned it." John chuckled, shaking his head. "Rest can wait. There's still work to do." As the sun rose over Eagle's Rest, John Carter stood tall, his cane in one hand and a determined look in his eyes. He wasn't just a farmer or a disabled veteran. He was a retired Green Beret, a protector, and a man who'd proven that even the quietest lives could hold the power to change the world.